The first thing anyone said to her in Hollowmere was, "Don't go up there." The woman at the coaching inn said it while handing Isla her change, didn't even wait to be asked, just looked at her bag, looked at the road leading north, and said it. Flat. Final. "I'm sorry?" Isla said. "Rathmore." The woman nodded toward the window. Up the hill, through the trees, you could just make out the roof line, dark stone against a gray sky. "You've got that look, the look of someone who's answered an advertisement." "I have, actually," Isla said. "Housekeeper's position." The woman said nothing, just slid the change across the counter and turned away. It didn't get better from there. The man at the stables, older, weathered, the kind of face that had seen everything and filed it all under "bad idea," stopped her before she could speak. "You're going up to the house," he said. "I am," Isla said. "Could I hire a—" "Last girl lasted a week." He picked up a brush and went back to the horse. "One before that, 3 days. One before that, well, we don't talk about her." "What happened to her?" Isla asked. He looked at her over the horse's back. "She left," he said, in a tone that suggested left was doing a lot of heavy lifting. Isla hired the cart anyway. The village butcher tried next. He'd leaned across the counter with the earnest urgency of a man who felt personally responsible for her survival. "The Duke," he said, lowering his voice even though they were alone, "is not right." "Not right how?" "In the head." He tapped his temple. 10 years up in that house, alone. Won't come to the village, won't receive visitors. They say he walks the corridors at night. They say he hasn't spoken to a living soul in— "He sent a letter," Isla said, "advertising the position, with a salary." She picked up her bag. "People who don't speak don't write letters." The butcher opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. She was already out the door. She told herself on the cart ride up that she wasn't nervous, she was practical. Her mother needed medicine, medicine cost money, and the Rathmore salary was nearly double what she'd find anywhere else in the county. That was the entire equation. The trees closed in around the road. It got darker even though it was only mid-afternoon. The driver, a boy of about 16, kept his eyes on the horse and said nothing. Then the house came into view. She told herself she wouldn't react. She reacted. It wasn't ugly. It hadn't been once, you could see that. Enormous, 3 stories of dark stone, high windows, grounds that had probably been beautiful 20 years ago. But 20 years of nobody caring had done their work. Ivy pulling at the stonework, windows that needed washing. The whole place had the look of something that had given up, not fallen apart, just stopped trying. Like the man inside it, she supposed. The boy stopped the cart at the gate and looked at her. "I'll be fine," she said, before he could say anything. She picked up her bag and walked through the gate. The housekeeper who answered the door was a small woman in her 60s named Mrs. Crane. Sharp eyes, the expression of someone who had been managing an unmanageable situation for a very long time. She looked Isla up and down. "You're younger than I expected." "I'm older than I look," Isla said. Mrs. Crane stepped back to let her in. The entrance hall had high ceilings, a staircase going up into shadow, floors with good bones under the dust. Cold, despite the season, the kind of cold that lived in stone walls and didn't leave. "His Grace will not receive you today," Mrs. Crane said, low. "Possibly not tomorrow. You'll begin in the east wing, cleaning primarily, and I'll go through the rules in the morning." "Rules?" Isla said. "There are rooms you don't enter, hours you don't keep, questions you don't ask." Mrs. Crane looked at her steadily. "The previous girls found this difficult." "I'm not the previous girls," Isla said. Mrs. Crane looked at her for a moment. "No," she said, slowly, as if she wasn't sure yet whether that was good or bad. "Come on, then." Her room was small, clean, on the 3rd floor. A window looking out over the back grounds, wild, overgrown, but with a strange dark beauty in the evening light. She unpacked, sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the house. It was quiet in the way that big empty things were quiet. Not peaceful, but held, like it was waiting for something.
like it had been waiting for a very long time. She thought about her mother, the small, damp flat, the rattling window, the cough that had been getting worse since January. She needs consistent treatment, Miss Marrow, consistent and long-term. She thought about the salary, got into bed, and told herself to sleep. She woke in the night needing water. She'd forgotten to fill the jug. Down the main staircase, left, then left again. That was what Mrs. Crane had said. She went left, then right, because right felt more promising. It was not more promising. A long carpeted corridor, doors on both sides, all of them dark. Then one with light underneath it, thin, amber, low, a dying fire or a single candle. She pushed the door open. It was not Mrs. Crane. A study, large, with shelves and a desk, and the remains of a fire burned down to almost nothing. A single candle on the mantelpiece, nearly gone. And in the armchair, in the shadows, completely still, a man. Not asleep, eyes open, just sitting there in the near dark, doing nothing, like he'd been there a very long time and had lost track of the reason he'd started. He was younger than she'd expected. Dark hair, dark eyes, a face that had been through something and come out the other side not exactly intact. He looked at her. She looked at him. Then he stood. He was tall, and the candlelight sent his shadow up the wall behind him. And she would not, she told herself firmly, be frightened by shadows. "You," he said, low, not loud. Somehow that made it worse. "Are in the wrong room." "I know, I'm sorry. I was looking for the kitchen. Wrong room, I'll go." "You're the new girl," he said, not a question. "Miss Marrow, Isla Marrow, I arrived this evening." "I know when you arrived." She stopped. He looked at her across the dark room, and she had the uncomfortable feeling of being read, assessed, filed in about 4 seconds. "Next time," he said, "knock." "Of course, I'm sorry, I didn't realize." "Or don't come to this part of the house at all." He looked back at the dead fire. "That would be preferable." "Right, yes, understood." She took a step back. "Good night, you're—" Her heel caught the edge of the rug. The backward stumble, the grab for the doorframe that wasn't quite where she'd thought, the lurch, and then a hand, around her arm, firm, immediate. She straightened up. He was right there. He'd crossed the room. She hadn't heard him move, and they were close, suddenly in the way that accidents made you close, without any decision being made about it. Neither of them moved. She could feel the warmth of his hand through her sleeve, and his eyes this close weren't simply dark. They were a very deep gray, and there was something in them she hadn't expected. Not anger, not cold indifference. Something much older than that, much more tired. He let go, stepped back, all the way back, like a door closing. "Good night, Miss Marrow." "Good night," she said. She walked out, down the corridor, up the stairs, all the way to her small room where she sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the spot on her arm where his hand had been. She didn't find the kitchen. She wasn't thirsty anymore. He came to find her at 7 in the morning. Isla was in the kitchen, hands wrapped around a cup of tea, still thinking about the night before, when she heard footsteps in the corridor. Not Mrs. Crane's footsteps. These were different, deliberate. The footsteps of a man who had decided to do something and was doing it. He appeared in the kitchen doorway. He was fully dressed, dark coat, no warmth in it, the complete assembled version of the Duke of Rathmore that the candlelight last night had only suggested. He looked at her sitting at his kitchen table with her teacup, like he was filing this away under unexpected and hadn't decided what to do with it. "Miss Marrow," he said. "Your Grace," she said. "Tea?" A pause. "No." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. She hadn't expected that. She was beginning to think that whatever she expected from this man, the reality was going to be something different. He placed both hands flat on the table. "Rules," he said. There were 7 of them.
He listed them without preamble, without explanation, without any softening. No entry to the West Wing, no entry to the library after 9, no entry to the study, ever, under any circumstances, which made Isla think of last night and carefully keep her face neutral. No questions about the history of the house. No conversations with village people about what happened inside Rathmore. No guests. And no wandering the corridors after dark. He said, each one looking at her directly. She looked back and nodded. "Questions?" he said when he finished. "Just one," Isla said. Something moved across his face. Of course there's one. What counts as wandering? Is purposeful walking permitted, or is it the wandering specifically that's the problem? He looked at her for a long moment. "Good night hours," he said. "Stay in your room." "Right. Got it." He stood, straightened his coat, looked at her one more time with that reading look. "Mrs. Crane will give you your duties. I expect them completed." "Of course," Isla said pleasantly. He left. Isla finished her tea. She broke the first rule before 10 o'clock. Not entirely intentionally. She was cleaning the upstairs corridor when she reached a door at the end that was different from the others. Heavier, older, the kind that suggested the room behind it had been important once. She tried the handle, just to see. It was unlocked. She looked left, she looked right. Empty corridor. She pushed it open. A sitting room, or had been, furniture under white sheets, a fireplace long unused, a window so dirty the light came through gray and thick. Nothing alarming, just a room that had been closed up and forgotten. She noted the view, overgrown grounds, a stone wall, the hills beyond, and pulled the door closed. 45 seconds. But she had been inside. Rule 1, broken. Mrs. Crane found her at 11 with a list of questions. He said no questions about the history of the house, Isla said. He didn't say no questions in general. These are about the linen cupboard. Mrs. Crane looked at the list. It was, in fact, entirely about the linen cupboard and the cleaning schedule, and whether the east windows opened or were painted shut. "Fine," Mrs. Crane said, and answered them. Rule 4, technically intact. Isla decided to count this as a victory. The corridor behind the kitchen was clearly not the west wing. The west wing was on the other side of the house entirely, which Isla had established by quietly mapping the building in her head since arrival. This corridor led to a storeroom at an old butler's pantry. She was exploring it at 2:30 when she found a small door at the end, set into the wall at a slight angle. Behind it, a staircase going up. The west wing was on the other side of the house. This staircase went up, not across, technically. She went up. It came out into a narrow upper corridor lined with old portraits, dusty frames, faces she didn't recognize. She was looking at one of them, a woman in green, painted maybe 60 years ago, with a look of mild amusement that Isla felt a certain kinship with when she heard footsteps. Heavy, slow, familiar. She looked left and right. Nowhere to go. She was standing in the middle of a straight, empty corridor with absolutely no reasonable explanation for being there. The Duke of Rathmore appeared at the far end. He stopped. He looked at her. She smiled. Cheerfully, the smile of a person completely unsurprised to be where she was. "Miss Marrow," he said. "Your Grace?" she said. A long pause. He looked at the portrait. He looked at her. He looked at the staircase door behind her, still slightly ajar. "This is not the East Wing," he said. "No," she agreed. "It's lovely up here, though." "Is that your grandmother?" She nodded at the portrait. He closed his eyes, just for a second. The expression of a man exercising enormous patience. "Come with me," he said. He gave her the conservatory, the whole thing, every window, every pane of glass, every surface. 3 hours filthy, and she absolutely deserved it and knew that, and he knew that she knew that. What he didn't know was that she found it genuinely interesting. Old plant pots with the ghosts of soil in them, a vine that had come through a broken pane and made itself comfortable. Tiles in a pattern she traced with her finger while she worked. She handed him a perfect conservatory at 5:30. He inspected it without comment. Dinner is at 7, which was, she suspected, as close to well done as he got. Lovely. What's for Mrs. Crane will tell you, he said, and left. 2.5 rules broken. Not bad for a first day. She found him by accident. That part was genuinely true. She was looking for the linen cupboard, somewhere on the 2nd floor, east side, a description that had turned out to cover a substantial amount of ground. She'd been up and down the corridor twice when she took a turning she hadn't tried and saw him. The corridor ended in a tall window, gray afternoon light falling in a long rectangle, and there, beside it, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed and his eyes closed, was the Duke of Rathmore. Isla stopped. Without the watchful eyes, without the controlled expression he wore like a second coat, he looked different. Not softer exactly, less defended. Like a house with its shutters open. She thought of what Mrs. Crane had said that morning, quietly, when the subject had come up. He doesn't sleep much, never has. Worse these past years. She looked at him in the gray light, finally still, finally getting whatever rest he could manage. She turned around carefully, the way you moved around something fragile without admitting it was fragile, and took one step back. How long have you been standing there, Miss Marrow? She stopped.
His voice was exactly the same as always. No grogginess, no startled quality. Like he'd known she was there the whole time. She turned back. His eyes were open now, still leaning against the wall, watching her. Long enough, she said. Something shifted in his expression. Just a fraction. That's not an answer. No, she agreed. It's not. She held his gaze long enough to make the point, short enough to keep it, and walked back down the corridor. She found the linen cupboard on her 3rd pass, behind a door she'd assumed was a wardrobe. She stripped the beds and remade them, and thought about a man leaning against a wall with his eyes closed, and the particular quiet of a house that had forgotten what it felt like to have someone in it who wasn't afraid of it. She wasn't afraid of it. She wasn't afraid of him either. She wasn't entirely sure yet if that was brave or just foolish. Possibly both. It rained for 3 days straight. Not dramatic rain, not the kind that came with thunder and made things interesting. Just steady, gray, relentless English rain that turned the grounds into mud and made the inside of Rathmore feel even more sealed off from the world than it already did. Isla cleaned things. There was an almost unlimited amount to clean in a house this size when it had been half neglected for a decade. She worked through the east wing methodically, room by room, genuinely absorbed, not by the cleaning itself, but by what it uncovered. A house told you things when you paid attention. This one told her it had been beautiful once, that someone had chosen the wallpaper carefully, hung the curtains with intention, arranged the furniture to catch the light, that whoever had built this place had loved it, and then had stopped. She was thinking about this, on her knees, scrubbing a floor that hadn't been properly scrubbed in approximately a decade, when Mrs. Crane appeared with 2 cups of tea and the expression of a woman who had decided something. Up, Mrs. Crane said. Take a rest. Isla sat up, took the tea. Mrs. Crane lowered herself onto the old settee, with the careful movement of someone whose knees had opinions about cold weather, and looked out the rain-streaked window. You're not leaving, Mrs. Crane said. It wasn't a question. No, Isla said. The others left. Mrs. Crane wrapped both hands around her cup. First girl, 6 days, said the house made noises at night. Second girl saw him in the corridor one morning and simply went, didn't even collect her wages. He's not that frightening, Isla said. Mrs. Crane looked at her sideways. Isn't he?
Isla thought about dark rooms and near falls, and a hand around her arm, and eyes that were gray, not black, when you got close enough to see properly. He's a lot, but not frightening, not exactly. Mrs. Crane was quiet. Outside, the rain ran down the glass in long fingers. "You want to know," Mrs. Crane said, not accusing, just knowing. "I do," Isla said honestly, "but I wasn't going to ask." "No, I noticed." Mrs. Crane looked at her cup. "That's why I'm going to tell you." She told it the way old people told old stories, not in a straight line, but in circles, coming back around to things, adding details she'd forgotten and then remembered. 10 years ago, she said, maybe 11 now. He'd been different then. Not warm, he'd never been warm, but present, in the world. He'd come to the house in summers, had people to stay, rode in the mornings, went up to London in the seasons. A serious young man who laughed occasionally and managed his responsibilities well, and had, for a brief time, been genuinely happy.
There had been a woman. Eleanor Voss, Mrs. Crane said. Dorian Voss's cousin. She was... A pause. She was lovely. I don't say that easily. He was in love with her, Isla said. Completely. The way some men are once when they're young enough to do it properly. They were to be married, not officially announced, but settled between them, understood by everyone in the house. She looked at the window. And then one autumn, November, frost came early. Something happened. What? Nobody knows exactly. That's the thing. Mrs. Crane set her cup down. There was a story that went around about money, that he'd done something that wasn't right, and a woman, someone saying they'd seen him somewhere he shouldn't have been. It spread the way those things spread, fast and wide, and by the time anyone thought to question it, it was already everywhere. And Eleanor? Left. Flat. Final. Within a fortnight. Voss came up to the house. I was there. Very kind about it. Very sorry. Said Eleanor had made her decision and he couldn't change it. Said he'd tried. Mrs. Crane's mouth pressed together slightly. He was very kind. He's always very kind, Mr. Voss. Something in the way she said it made Isla look at her, but Mrs. Crane had moved on. After that, His Grace closed the house, sent most of the staff away, kept me, the groundsman, the cook, and just stayed. Stopped going to London, stopped receiving anyone, stopped... She paused. Stopped participating in all of it. The rain ran down the window. The fire ticked. 10 years, Isla said quietly. 10 years, Mrs. Crane agreed. Then she looked at Isla directly, the sharp eyes sharp, and said, "He talked to you yesterday." "We've spoken several times. The rules on the first." "No," Mrs. Crane shook her head. "I mean talked. East corridor, second floor. I heard it from the servants' stair. Not the words, just the sound of it. A conversation. Back and forth." A pause. "He doesn't do that. He gives instructions. He asks questions that need answers. It's not the same thing." Isla thought about how long have you been standing there, and that's not an answer, and the slight shift in his expression when she'd said, long enough, and walked away. "We exchanged about 4 sentences," she said. "Yes," Mrs. Crane said. "That's 4 more than he's managed with anyone in quite some time." She looked into her cup. "He hasn't spoken to a living soul in this house, properly spoken the way people speak, since before I can remember." A pause. "Until you," she said. Isla didn't know what to say to that. She sat with the weight of it for a moment, then picked up her scrubbing brush because the floor wasn't going to finish itself, and sometimes when things got complicated, the best thing you could do was put your hands back to work. Mrs. Crane watched her, then stood and moved toward the door. "I'm not telling you this to make you feel responsible for him." "I know," Isla said. "He's not your... You're here to work, that's all." "I know," Isla said again. Mrs. Crane nodded and turned toward the door, and stopped. Isla saw it. The slight stilling, the almost imperceptible change in how she was holding herself. Then she stepped to one side very slightly, and her eyes went to a point just beyond the door frame. Isla looked up. The door was open halfway, the corridor beyond it gray with rain, and just at the edge of the frame, a shadow that wasn't the wall. He was there. Just the edge of a dark coat, the suggestion of a figure completely still. The angle was wrong for him to be looking at Mrs. Crane. He was looking at Isla. She couldn't see his face, couldn't know how long he'd been there, which parts of Mrs. Crane's quiet, careful story had reached him through a half-open door on a rainy afternoon. She looked back at him, steady, not guilty. She had nothing to be guilty of. Not apologetic, just meeting it, whatever it was. 1 second, 2, 3. Then the shadow moved, slow, unhurried footsteps going away down the corridor, getting quieter. Gone. Mrs. Crane let out a breath. "Well," she said, to no one in particular. "Well," Isla agreed. She went back to the floor, but she turned the look over in her mind, the one she'd caught for those 2 or 3 seconds through the gap in the door. It wasn't the assessing look, she knew that one. It wasn't the flat, cold look either. This was something else. She couldn't name it. She didn't have enough information yet. But it was different, and in a house where everything had been exactly the same for 10 years, different was, well, different was something. She heard it on a Thursday evening. She almost missed it, coming down the main staircase with an armful of folded linen, thinking about nothing, when something stopped her halfway down. Not a sound exactly, the ghost of one. She stood and listened. The house was doing its usual things, settling, breathing, the wind finding the gaps in the old stonework. But underneath all of that, if she held very still, there, music, faint, coming from somewhere above and to the left, filtered through walls and closed doors until it was barely more than a vibration in the air, a piano, something slow, something she didn't recognize, not a formal composition, not something practiced and perfected, but something that moved like thinking, like a person working something out, note by note, in the only language that made sense to them. She set the linen down on the stair. She went to find it. The west wing corridor was at the end of the north corridor, heavier than the others, an older iron handle, the kind of door that had been important once. Isla stopped in front of it. Rule 1, she thought, the first rule, the one he'd said first. She put her hand on the handle. The music was clearer here. That same slow, searching quality, like someone asking a question they didn't expect to be answered. She pushed the door open, just enough to slip through. The west wing corridor was darker than the rest of the house. The lamps hadn't been lit in years. The only light came from a window at the far end, a gray rectangle of evening sky. The carpet pattern was almost gone in the middle where feet had walked and then stopped walking. From behind one of the doors, 2/3 of the way down on the right, the music. She walked toward it the way you move toward something you weren't sure was real, in case walking normally broke the spell of it. The door was not quite closed, a finger's width of gap, just enough. She stopped outside it, put her back to the wall, and listened. It was him. She'd known that before she'd left the staircase, if she was honest. Who else was there? But knowing it and hearing it were different things, because the music was nothing like him, or rather, it was everything like him that he never let anyone see. It had the same weight, the same seriousness, the same quality of something that didn't do things by halves, but it was open, in a way he never was, unguarded, moving through something with a kind of honesty she suspected he didn't permit himself in any other form. She stood with her back to the wall and listened and didn't move. Time did a strange thing, became elastic, stretched and compressed. She stopped thinking about the linen on the stairs or the rules she was breaking. She just listened, let it come through the wall at her. Then it stopped. Not at the end of something, just stopped, mid-phrase, like he'd run out of words, or run out of the willingness to keep going. Silence, a long one. Then, without preamble, just his voice, exactly as it always was. "Come in or go, Miss Marrow." She didn't move. "I mean it. Standing in corridors is a habit I'd like you to break." She put her hand on the door and pushed it open. It had been a music room once, obviously, completely, built for exactly this purpose. High ceiling, better acoustics than the rest of the house, a long window along one wall, the wallpaper faded, peeling at the corners, a music stand with nothing on it, shelves with old scores, warped with age, and in the center of it all, a piano. And not a neglected piano, that was the thing she noticed immediately. Everything else in this wing had the sad quality of things abandoned, but the piano was clean. The keys were clean. The wood was polished, not dusty. This had been maintained, regularly, quietly, in a wing where nobody was supposed to go. He was sitting at it with his back to her, hands in his lap. He didn't turn around. She looked around the room, found a footstool near the window, dragged it to a spot far enough not to crowd him and close enough to be honest about the fact that she'd chosen to stay, and sat down. She said nothing. This was, for Ela Marrow, who had strong opinions about most things and a tendency to share them, genuinely difficult. She wanted to say the music was beautiful, which it had been. She wanted to ask what he was working through. She wanted to say something about the piano, the room, the fact that he'd said "come in" instead of "get out." She said none of it. She sat with her hands in her lap and looked at the window and let the silence exist. He still hadn't turned around. The evening light came gray and thin through the long window. Somewhere in the grounds, a bird made itself heard. A minute passed, maybe two, and then she saw it rather than heard it, a fractional shift in the set of his shoulders. He became aware of the silence. Not the silence of an empty room, the silence of someone choosing not to fill it. He turned his head slightly, just enough to see her in his peripheral vision, sitting there, looking at the window, not performing anything. She didn't look at him. He turned back to the piano, put one hand on the keys, lightly, not pressing, then lifted it again. "You're not going to say anything," he said. "No," she said. "Why not?" "Because it doesn't need anything said about it." Most people feel the need to comment. I'm not most people. She heard him make a small sound. Not quite a laugh. Not quite not a laugh. Something involuntary, quickly controlled, but there. "No," he said. "You're not." The silence came back, but different now. Not heavy, not waiting to be broken, just present. The comfortable kind, the kind that didn't need anything from you. She hadn't sat in a silence like this in, she couldn't remember when. She thought about Mrs. Crane's story, about a man who had been present in the world and then simply stopped. About 10 years of this room, maintained and silent, the keys clean, the music there whenever nobody could see it. She thought about what it cost to keep something alive for 10 years that you had to pretend didn't exist. She didn't say any of that. She stayed and let the room be what it was and let him be what he was. And outside the window, the sky went from gray to darker gray to the first suggestions of dark, and neither of them moved, and neither of them spoke. And it was too much, actually. Not in a bad way. In the way that things were sometimes too much because they were too real, because they got under defenses you hadn't realized you'd built. She became aware that her throat was tight. She looked at the window, blinked. Once. Twice. "Don't," she told herself firmly. "You have been here less than 2 weeks, and you will not—" "Miss Marrow." She said, carefully. "It's getting dark." She looked at the window. He was right. "So it is. You should go down for dinner." "Yes." She stood, smoothed her skirt, put her face in order, which required a small amount of effort she was fairly certain didn't show. "Mrs. Crane will be wondering." "She will," he agreed. She moved toward the door. Miss Marrow." She stopped. He still hadn't fully turned around. She could see his profile, the hard line of his jaw, the set of his mouth. "You'll close the door," he said, "on your way out." "Of course," she said. She went out, pulled the door closed behind her, gently, all the way, until she heard the latch click. She stood in the dark corridor for a moment, then walked back through the west wing, through the heavy door, back into the part of the house she was allowed to be in, and down to the warm kitchen. She ate dinner. She answered Mrs. Crane's questions with entirely truthful answers that nonetheless didn't mention the west wing at all. She went upstairs, got into the narrow bed, looked at the ceiling. She thought about a piano that had been polished for 10 years in a room where nobody was supposed to go. She thought about a man who had said, "Come in," instead of "Get out." She thought about the silence and what it had felt like to sit in it with another person without any of it needing to be explained or excused. The tight feeling in her throat came back. She let it, just for a minute, in the dark, where nobody could see. Then she turned over and went to sleep. He arrived on a Friday morning in a very good carriage. Isla noticed it first. She was cleaning the front windows and had a direct view of the gate. Black lacquer, brass fittings, a driver who handled the horses with the confidence of someone well paid to do so. The kind of carriage that said, "The person inside has never once worried about money and would like you to know it." Behind her, somewhere in the house, she heard Mrs. Crane say something sharp and quiet to the kitchen girl, the kind of thing you said when you were bracing yourself. The carriage stopped. The door opened. Dorian Voss stepped out into the pale morning light and looked up at Rathmore the way a man looked at something that belonged to him, or that he'd decided should. He was handsome. She noted this the way she noted most things, directly, without making a fuss about it. Dark hair, a good coat, the kind of face that smiled easily and had learned, probably early, that smiling easily was an excellent tool. Perhaps 35, with the polish of a man who spent a great deal of time in London and found it agreed with him. He saw her at the window. He smiled. She went back to her cleaning. Mrs. Crane received him in the entrance hall with this specific warmth of someone being professionally welcoming to a person they had private feelings about. The slightly too formal handshake, the slightly too bright, "How lovely to have you, Mr. Voss." Isla, coming down the stairs with her bucket, caught the edge of it and filed it away. "And who is this?" Voss said, looking up at her. "Miss Marrow, our new housekeeper's assistant." "Miss Marrow," he said it like he was tasting it. Smiled again, the easy smile, the one that had clearly opened a great many doors. "How are you finding Rathmore?" "Very clean," Isla said pleasantly. "Getting cleaner." He laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of him. "I like her," he said to Mrs. Crane, as though Isla weren't standing 4 steps above him. "Where's Adrian?" Adrian. First name. Easy, familiar. The name of a man who assumed closeness as a matter of course. "His Grace is in the study. I'll let him know you've arrived." "Don't trouble yourself." Voss was already moving toward the corridor. "He'll know." He was right. The Duke appeared within the hour. Isla was in the dining room when they came through together. She kept working. She had, over the past 2 weeks, developed a useful talent for being invisible when useful and visible when necessary. Voss talked, easily, continuously. London news, legal matters, a dinner he'd been to last week. The Duke listened with the quality he had of giving full attention without indicating what he was doing with it. But he was not relaxed, that wasn't the word, less braced, maybe, in the way you were sometimes less braced around people you'd known a long time, even without lowering your guard. Old friends, she thought, and then quieter, or what passes for it. She didn't know why she thought the second part. She filed it away and kept working. Voss found her again at lunch, appearing in the kitchen doorway with the confidence of a man who ate wherever he pleased. "May I?" he said, nodding at the chair across from her. "It's not my kitchen," she said. He sat down, helped himself to bread, and looked at her with those easy, assessing eyes. "How long have you been here?" 2 weeks. "And how are you really finding it?" The smile, but this time with something more genuine underneath, or something that did a very good impression. "I've known Adrian since we were boys. I'm aware of the particular atmosphere."
It's a house, Isla said. Houses don't have atmospheres. People do. He laughed. That real laugh again. The surprised one. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone more daunted. The last few girls were daunted. So I've heard, Isla said. He studied her, not unpleasantly, just the frank kind of curiosity. Most people who take positions in houses like this are either desperate or oblivious. Which are you? Practical, she said. He smiled. I think I'm going to enjoy this visit. He was, she would give him that, genuinely good company. Over the next 2 days, he filled rooms differently than the Duke did. Where the Duke's presence was a weight, a gravity, Voss was more like weather, bright and moving, liable to turn up anywhere. He told stories, good ones, with enough absurdity to be funny without being unkind. He asked questions and listened to the answers. He remembered things she'd said and referred to them, which was either genuine interest or very good technique, and she hadn't decided yet which. He made her laugh twice. It wasn't difficult to make her laugh. She had a quick sense of the absurd, and Rathmore had not been providing much opportunity for it, but she noted it. The Duke watched. Not obviously, but she was aware of it. The quality of his attention from across rooms, the slight shift in how he held himself when Voss said something that made her smile. She'd become, in 2 weeks, fairly good at reading the Duke's silences, and the silences he produced when Voss was talking to her were a specific kind she hadn't catalogued before. She didn't know what to do with that. She filed it away and kept working. It happened on the second afternoon. She was in the library, barely 4 o'clock, well within the rules, returning books she'd found in the east rooms. She was on the stepladder, replacing the last of them, when Voss came in. There you are, he said pleasantly, like he'd been looking. Here I am, she agreed, coming down. He crossed to look at the shelf. You put them back in order. They were out of order. Adrian will either not notice or appreciate it enormously. Probably the latter. He's particular about books. I've noticed. She picked up the empty crate. Was there something you needed, Mr. Voss? Not needed, no. He turned from the shelf. I wanted to ask how you were really managing. I'm managing fine. He hasn't frightened you off. He said it without irony, which made it land differently. His not easy, Isla. First name, suddenly. She noticed. This place takes something out of people. It took something out of him. A pause. I worry about him. I've been worrying for 10 years. She looked at him, at the easy face with something more complicated underneath it. He seems like someone who's capable of being all right, eventually. Something moved across Voss's face, quick, unreadable. Do you think so? He said. I do. He looked at her for a moment. Then he reached out and took her hand. Not grabbing, just taking. His hand around hers, a warm, firm, deliberate clasp. Rathmore can be overwhelming, he said quietly. For anyone. If it ever gets to be too much, I'm here. You don't have to manage it alone. Isla opened her mouth. The library door opened. All 3 of them froze. 2 seconds. In those 2 seconds, Isla registered the Duke in the doorway, the quality of his stillness, absolute, total, the cessation of movement that in anyone else might have looked like shock, but in him looked like the opposite, like a man becoming more still as a way of controlling something. His eyes went to their hands, Voss's hand around hers, still there. Then he looked up, at Voss first. Something passed between them, something old, something she didn't have the language for. Then at her. Flat on the surface, and whatever was underneath was so far down she couldn't find it. He didn't say anything. He stepped back from the doorway and pulled the door closed. Not a slam, quiet, deliberate, the careful closing of a man who had decided something. Voss let go of her hand. The library felt different, colder. I should, Isla started. Yes, Voss said. His voice was the same as always, smooth, even. She picked up the empty crate and walked out into an empty corridor. At dinner, the Duke sat at the head of the table as usual. Voss sat to his left. Isla served. Voss talked. The Duke listened. Not once, not for the entire meal, not for the soup or the meat or the long period afterward when Voss was telling a story about a judge he knew, not once did the Duke look at her. Not when she poured the water, not when she brought the second course, not when she was standing 3 feet away from him. He looked at his plate. He looked at Voss. He looked at the window.
He did not look at her. She kept her face neutral and her hands steady and told herself it didn't matter. She was here to work. What he did or didn't do with his eyes was not her concern. She cleared the last of the dishes, said good night to Voss, who returned it with that warm, easy smile, and went through to the kitchen. She set down the dishes, stood at the window and looked out at the dark grounds, and thought about a library and a hand that had taken hers before she could decide what she thought about it, and a door that had closed very quietly, and a man currently sitting in the next room not looking at her. Mrs. Crane came in with the serving dishes and took one look at Isla's face. "Sit down," she said. "I'll do those." "I'm fine," Isla said. "Sit down anyway." Isla sat down. Mrs. Crane washed the dishes. Neither of them spoke. Through the wall, faint and muffled, Voss's voice continued some story or other. She could not hear the Duke responding, but that, she was learning, was almost always the case. She knew something was wrong before she saw him. A heaviness in the air, a quality of silence that was different from the usual silence. She dressed, went downstairs, made tea. Mrs. Crane came in, took one look at her, then looked at the ceiling in the direction of the study and said nothing, which said everything. "He's in a mood," Isla said. "He's in a mood," Mrs. Crane confirmed. "Since before 5, I heard him." Isla wrapped her hands around her cup and went back through the previous day. Voss's arrival, the kitchen lunch, the library, the hand, the door closing, dinner. The dinner where he hadn't looked at her once. She had a feeling she knew what this was about. She went about her morning methodically, the way she always did, because whatever was happening, the work still needed doing, and she was not going to tiptoe around a man's mood like one of the girls who'd lasted a week. She was coming back up the stairs with an armful of books when she heard it. Miss Marrow. His voice, from the direction of the study. She took a breath. She went. He was standing behind the desk, not sitting, which she noted. Standing meant he'd chosen not to be comfortable. Standing meant this was something he wanted physical height for. "Close the door," he said. She closed it. "How long," he said, without preamble, "have you known Dorian Voss?" She blinked. Of all the questions she'd been preparing for, this wasn't it. "I don't know him. He arrived 2 days ago. I met him when he arrived. You seemed comfortable with him very quickly. He's easy to talk to." "Yes," the Duke said. Something in his voice, flat, careful, the word easy doing more work than it should. "What did he tell you in the library?" "He asked how I was managing. He said Rathmore could be overwhelming. He said if I needed—" "What else?" "Nothing else." "You're lying." The room went very still. Isla looked at him, at the hard set of his face, harder than she'd seen it, the jaw tight, and the eyes doing that thing where they showed nothing because everything was being kept very deliberately behind them. "I'm not lying," she said, evenly. "He told you something about the house, about me. He came around the desk, not fast, not threatening, just removing the desk from between them, which was somehow worse. He's been building a confidence since he arrived." "We've spoken 3 times, Isla said. "And he held your hand." There it was. The air between them had the specific charge of something about to either break or catch fire. "He was being kind," she said carefully. "That's all it was. Dorian Voss is not kind without reason. That's a very bleak way to see people. It's an accurate way to see that person." He stopped a few feet from her, close enough that she could see the effort it was taking to keep his voice level. He sought you out repeatedly in a house where there is very little reason to seek out a housekeeper's assistant unless he wanted something, information about this house, about me. You think, she said slowly, that I'm reporting to him. He said nothing, which was its own answer. You think I've been gathering information and passing it to your childhood friend who has been charming me into... She stopped, felt something rise in her chest, not quite anger, something more complicated with hurt underneath that she hadn't expected to find there. That's what you think. I think Voss came here for a reason, the Duke said. I think he found you useful. And I think, Isla said, that you've been alone so long you've forgotten what it looks like when someone is simply being a normal person. I know what... He made conversation, she said, keeping her voice clear and precise, because if she wasn't precise, it was going to become something else. He told stories. He asked how I was finding the house. He held my hand for 4 seconds and said Rathmore could be overwhelming. She looked at him directly. Which it is. You know that. You built it that way. The Duke's expression had gone somewhere she couldn't track. Not anger, not cold, something more unsettled than either. You let him? I didn't let him anything. I heard the edge come into her voice and didn't pull it back. I was standing in the library returning books. He came in. We spoke. That's the whole of it. She looked at him, which you would know if you'd asked me instead of whatever this is. I'm asking you now. No, you're not. You called me in here having already decided. You're telling me what I did, not asking. She kept her eyes on his. And what you've decided is wrong. Silence. She could see him wanting to push further, and something else in him pulling back. And she couldn't tell which was going to win. She didn't wait to find out. I have been in this house for 2 weeks, she said, quietly, clearly, each word placed down like something she'd considered. I have broken 3 rules, all minor, and I told you about 2 myself. I cleaned your conservatory. I returned your books. I sat in the West Wing and said nothing because nothing needed saying. She held his gaze. I have not reported anything to anyone because there is nothing to report and because that is not who I am. He said nothing. And I understand, she said, why you don't trust people. I understand it completely, but... She stopped, because what came next was the thing she'd been turning over since Mrs. Crane's story, since the music room, since a hand that had caught her and let go immediately after. She said it. You haven't trusted anyone in 10 years. Her voice came out quieter than she'd intended. Not soft, just honest. Not one person. And that's... I understand it, I do, but it isn't my fault. She looked at him and made herself keep looking because she meant it and wanted him to know she meant it. What was done to you isn't my fault. What you think of people now because of what was done to you, that isn't my fault either. The room was absolutely silent. He was looking at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not in the library, not in the music room, not at any point in 2 weeks of unexpected conversations in broken rules and corridor encounters. Something had gone through his armor, through all of it, and reached the person underneath who hadn't been reached in a very long time. She picked up her chin. I'll go finish the East Corridor, she said, and she walked out. She made it to the linen cupboard before she had to stop and put her hand against the wall and breathe. Not because she was upset, or not only that, because she was angry, and the anger had surprised her with how much of it there was, and underneath the anger was the thing she'd felt at dinner last night that she still didn't have a clean name for. She breathed, straightened up, went to get her cleaning things. Behind her,
At the end of the corridor, the study door did not open. He did not call after her. She told herself she hadn't expected him to. She told herself that for the rest of the morning, at regular intervals with varying degrees of conviction. The note came at noon. Not a conversation, a note slipped under her door while she was downstairs, so that she came back to find it on the floor, a small folded square of paper. Miss Marrow, your services are no longer required at Rathmore. You will be compensated for the full month. Please have your things ready by 3 o'clock. R. She read it twice, folded it carefully along its original crease, set it on the washstand. Then she got her bag out from under the bed and started packing. She was methodical about it. Clothes first, folded the way her mother had taught her. Her mother who needed medicine, who was 2 days' ride away waiting for money that was no longer coming. She noted this thought, put it in the category of problems to solve later, and kept packing. Her books, the small tin with her savings, the photograph of her mother she'd set on the windowsill her first night, the extra pair of boots. She was checking under the bed when Mrs. Crane appeared in the doorway. She took one look at the bag on the bed. "No," she said. "I'm afraid so," Isla said, from the floor. "What did he say?" "A note," Isla said, from the floor. "Services no longer required. Very efficient." Mrs. Crane picked up the note, read it, set it back down with the precise care of a woman controlling a strong feeling. "It's because of yesterday," Isla said, not a question. "It's because he's a fool," Mrs. Crane said, which was the most direct thing Isla had ever heard her say. Isla looked at the nearly full bag, at the room that had been hers for 2 weeks, the narrow bed, the window with the wild grounds, the smell that had faded into something more like home. She picked up the bag. "Don't." Mrs. Crane's voice had changed, the professional composure slipping at the edges, revealing something more genuine. The voice of a woman who had been in this house for 30 years and had been lonely in it for 10 of them, and had, in 2 weeks, gotten used to not being quite so lonely. "Isla, don't go." Isla felt something pull in her chest, hard and sudden, the way you felt things when you'd been keeping them carefully managed and then someone used your name. "I'll write," she said, "when I'm settled." "That is not—" Mrs. Crane pressed her lips together. Her eyes were bright. Isla reached out and squeezed her hand. Once. Firm. Then she picked up her bag and went downstairs. She did not look for him. She thought about it, considered the study door as she passed it, considered knocking, considered any number of things she'd been composing since noon. She walked past without stopping. Through the entrance hall, past the portraits, the chandelier that needed dusting, the floor she had cleaned herself on her 3rd day and which was already getting dusty again. She opened the front door. The sky was the color of pewter, low and heavy, the kind of sky that had made a decision. She walked down the front steps. She made it to the gate before the rain started. Not the 3-day gray drizzle she'd gotten used to. This was serious rain, fat, cold drops that soaked through wool in minutes. She pulled her coat tighter and kept walking. 1.5 miles to Hollowmere. She kept her eyes on the road and walked, and did not think about the note on the washstand, or Mrs. Crane's face, or the study door she had walked past without stopping. She thought about her mother, the journey home, the coach, if she had enough for the coach, the conversation she'd have to have about the position not working out, about finding something else, about the money and the medicine and the winter coming. She did not think about the music room. The rain got heavier. Her boots were not enjoying the waterlogged grass verge. Each step made a small, unhappy sound. She walked. She was not going to cry on a road in the rain because a difficult man had sent her a note. She was practical. Her throat was very tight. She walked faster. He hadn't meant to watch. He'd gone to the window because he'd heard the door. He always heard the door. Old house, sound traveling strangely, and looked out because it was a reflex. She was at the gate. Dark coat, bag over her shoulder, walking with that particular quality she had of not adjusting her pace for anything. Head up, not looking back. He should have turned away. There was nothing to see. A woman leaving, which he'd said she should do, which was the sensible decision. The decision that... The rain started. He watched her keep walking, watched her pull her coat tighter without slowing, without stopping, without any indication she was going to do anything other than walk all the way to Hollowmere in a November rainstorm with her chin up. He stood at the window. He thought about the note he'd written at 11, when the anger had settled into something colder, or what he'd told himself was cold and considered. Services no longer required in his own handwriting, formal and final, and cowardly, something in him said, and he told that something to be quiet. He thought about the study yesterday.
Her standing there saying, "You haven't trusted anyone in 10 years," in a voice that wasn't cruel. That was the thing. It hadn't been cruel. Careful. Like a person saying a true thing because it needed saying, not because they wanted to wound. He thought about dinner the night before, when he'd looked at every object in the room except her, because looking at her had become too much somehow, at some point without his permission. She was smaller now in the rain, getting further. Something was happening in his chest, not sharp, not sudden, but building, slow and unstoppable. He didn't have a clean name for it. He'd stopped needing names for things when he'd stopped having people to say them to. She was nearly at the bend. Another minute and the trees would close around her and she'd be gone, back to wherever she'd come from, and the house would go back to being what it had been before. A girl with a bag and too many questions had come through his front door and refused to be frightened of anything. He was already moving before he'd made a decision. The front door, the steps. The rain hit him immediately, cold and decisive. She was 30 yards down the road, still walking, still not looking back. "Miss Marrow!" His voice came out louder than he'd intended. She heard it, stopped mid-step, the way you stopped when something reached you that you hadn't expected. She didn't turn around. "Come inside," he said. A silence, long. The rain came down between them, and she stood perfectly still with her back to him and her bag over her shoulder. Turn around, he thought, which was not something he'd thought about another person in a very long time, in any form, for any reason. She turned around. She was soaked, her coat dark with rain, her hair plastered to her face, boots muddied from the verge. She was looking at him from 30 yards away with an expression he felt rather than read, wet and cold and angry, and something else underneath the anger that he recognized because he'd been carrying the same thing since yesterday and hadn't known what to do with it. Her eyes were full. Not spilling. She wasn't crying, was very clearly and deliberately not crying, but full, the way eyes went when something had been held back for a while and was making its feelings known about that. He stood on the steps in the rain. She stood on the road in the rain. Then she walked back. Not fast, just walking. The same pace she always had, the same quality of moving without adjusting for anything. Muddy boots on the wet road, bag still over her shoulder, eyes on him the whole way. She came through the gate, up the drive, stopped at the bottom of the steps and looked up at him. He looked down at her. She was shivering. He could see it now, the cold getting into her properly. She didn't say anything. He stepped to one side. She came up the steps and passed him into the house. The entrance hall was warm and dry and entirely silent. She stood, dripping on the marble floor with her bag over her shoulder, looking at the middle distance. He stood 2 feet away and tried to find the words for something he hadn't said to another person in 10 years. "I was wrong," he said. She looked at him, slowly. "About Voss,"
About what I... He said it the way he did everything, directly, without softening, because he didn't know how to soften things and thought she probably didn't want him to try. I was wrong. I'm not going to explain it in a way that makes it acceptable because it wasn't. He held her gaze. I was wrong. She looked at him for a long moment. A drop of water ran from her hair down her face. She didn't wipe it away. Yes, she said, finally. You were. He nodded, once. Mrs. Crane will have dry things, he said. Yes, she said again. Neither of them moved. The fire ticked somewhere down the corridor. Rathmore breathed around them, patient and waiting. Then she set her bag down on the marble floor, just left it there, right in the middle of the entrance hall, as though she was done carrying it for now, and walked toward the stairs. At the bottom step, she paused. She didn't look back. Good night, Your Grace, she said. Good night, Miss Marrow, he said. She went upstairs. He stood in the entrance hall with her bag at his feet and rain drying on his coat and looked at the empty staircase for a long time. Then he picked up her bag, set it at the foot of the stairs, neatly, where she'd find it in the morning. He went to find a towel for his wet coat. And somewhere above him, in the narrow room on the third floor, he heard footsteps. Quiet, familiar. The specific sound of Isla Marrow moving around the space she'd made her own. And something in his chest that had been braced against itself for a very long time did something he hadn't expected. It eased. Just slightly. Just enough.
The storm didn't stop. By midnight, it had gotten worse. Not dramatically, just more of everything. More rain, more wind, more of that sound old houses made when weather got into the gaps between the stones and decided to stay a while. Isla lay in the narrow bed and listened and did not sleep. 2 hours. She'd tried all the usual things, none of it worked. Her mind kept doing what minds did when you told them not to, which was exactly that thing, repeatedly, with enthusiasm. She thought about the road, the rain, the 30 yards between her and a gate. She thought about come inside in a voice that had sounded different from his usual voice, less controlled, like something that had gotten out before he'd decided to let it. She got up. She wasn't looking for him. She was cold, genuinely physically cold. The fire had gone down to nothing, and she was going to the kitchen for tea. She took her blanket, wrapped it around her shoulders, and went downstairs in her stockinged feet. She lit a lamp, put the kettle on, stood at the stove and listened to the storm work on the house. She was reaching for the tea when she heard footsteps. She'd learned the sound of his footsteps well enough that she didn't tense. She knew what was coming before it arrived. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, still dressed, which meant he hadn't been to bed either. He looked at her at the stove with a blanket around her shoulders. She looked at him in yesterday's coat. Tea? She said. A pause. Yes, he said. He sat at the end of the table, the way you sat when you weren't sure you'd been invited, but had decided to come anyway. She made the tea, set a cup in front of him, sat at her usual place, and wrapped both hands around her own. The storm pushed at the windows. Neither of them spoke for a while. This was different from the music room silence, different from the corridor silences and the dinner silences. Those had been charged, loaded. This one was more like the silence of two people who had run out of the energy to maintain positions. He spoke first. Where would you have gone? He said. If I hadn't... Hollowmere. Inn if they had room, coach south in the morning. And then? Home. Figure it out from there. Your mother, he said. She looked at him. He'd remembered. She'd mentioned her mother exactly once, briefly, the first week. She's not well. She needs medicine that costs money. That's why I'm here. That's why I answered the advertisement. The salary, he said. Yes. I would have. The compensation in the note it would have covered. I know, she said. That's not why I turned back. He looked at her. I turned back because you asked, not because of the money. Something moved across his face. He looked back at his cup. The storm found a gap somewhere in the upper stories and made a sound like a low note on a pipe organ, deep, resonant, filling the house from the top down. I owe you an explanation, he said, about yesterday. You said you were wrong. I was wrong, but that's not the same as explaining why. He kept his eyes on the cup. Voss he's been the one consistent thing in 10 years. He comes, handles the legal matters. I trusted him, completely. And when I saw him with you, I thought, you thought I was compromising that, she said. Yes, by talking to him, by letting him be. He stopped. He's charming. He's always been charming. I know what he does with it, and I've allowed it because he's the only. His jaw tightened, the sentence collapsing somewhere in the middle of itself. You were jealous, she said. The words sat between them on the kitchen table. He didn't answer, which was an answer. Not of Voss, she said, carefully, because she was beginning to understand the shape of it. Of whatever it was that made him able to talk to me like that, easily, without all of. She gestured at the space between them, at the difficulty of it, at 10 years of walls. He looked at her for a long moment. I don't know how to do this, he said, quiet, stripped down, the most honest thing she'd heard him say. Talk to people. Be with people. I used to know. I've forgotten the shape of it. You're doing it now, she said. Badly. Yes, she agreed, but you're doing it. Something in him shifted, barely visible, but she was watching closely enough to catch it. The particular shift of someone who hadn't expected to be told they were doing something right. Tell me about before, she said. He looked at her. Before 10 years ago, Mrs. Crane said you were different. Tell me. A long pause. She thought the door was going to close the way it always did. She waited. I used to ride in the mornings, he said finally, early, before anyone was up. The grounds were kept then properly. There was a path through the east woods that nobody used but me. An hour every morning, just thinking or not thinking, just moving. A pause. I miss that more than almost anything. Not the person I was, just that hour. Eleanor used to leave coffee outside my door before I went, he said, softer. She knew I forgot to eat before riding. She never made a thing of it. It was just there. He stopped. I'm sorry, Ayla said, not performing it, just meaning it. It was a long time ago, he said, the automatic response of someone who had said it many times to close conversations down. That doesn't make it shorter, she said. He looked at her. And she saw it. The thing she'd seen through the door in the rain. The thing she'd seen at dinner when he hadn't looked at her. Closer now, more visible. Something behind the walls that was still, despite everything, alive. She started shivering around 1 in the morning, the kind of cold that had been building for hours and finally reached the point where the body decided, enough. She pulled the blanket tighter and tried not to show it. He noticed anyway. You're cold, he said. I'm fine, she said. The thing people said when both people in the room knew it wasn't true. He stood up, shrugged off his coat, the dark one, the good one, and came around the table and set it around her shoulders over the blanket. His hands there for a moment, settling it. Neither of them moved.
1 second, 2, longer than the first time in the entrance hall that first night, long enough that it stopped being about the coat. She could feel the warmth of his hands through the wool. She could feel him standing just behind her, the particular gravity of him that she'd gotten used to and hadn't gotten used to at all. She looked at the lamp on the table, at the steam from her cup. She didn't move. He didn't move. "You should have dry clothes," he said, quietly, close. "I should," she agreed. "Mrs. Crane will have something." "Mrs. Crane is asleep." "Yes." A pause. "Miss Marrow," he said. She turned her head slightly, not all the way, just enough. He was right there. She'd known he was right there. She'd felt the whole shape of it. But turning made it real in a different way, made it something they were both looking at instead of pretending not to notice. His hands still on her shoulders, his face, not soft, he wasn't built for soft, but open, unguarded. The face from the music room, the face that existed when he'd stopped managing everything. She looked at him. He looked at her. The storm did something large, somewhere above them, a sound like the house taking a breath, and neither of them moved. "This is," she started. "I know," he said. "I work here." "I know." "You sent me away this afternoon." "I know." His jaw moved. "I was wrong about that too." She looked at him for a long moment. "You're going to have to get better at that," she said. "At being wrong?" "At saying so." Something crossed his face, the almost laugh, the involuntary one. "I've had very little practice." "I know," she said. "You're going to need more." His hands still on her shoulders, the lamp still burning, the storm still going, the kitchen still small and separate from the rest of it, from the house and the 10 years and the things still unsaid. She turned back to face the table. He didn't move for another moment. Then slowly, his hands lifted from her shoulders. She felt the absence of them, which she noted and didn't examine too closely. And he came back around and sat down. His coat stayed around her shoulders. She didn't take it off. They sat there, 2 cups of tea going cold, a blanket and a coat, a storm outside that had decided to stay, and said nothing for a while. It was, she thought, the most comfortable silence she'd ever sat in, which was either very good or very complicated. Probably both. The storm cleared by morning. Isla awoke to actual sunlight, thin, pale, the tentative kind that came after bad weather as if checking whether it was still welcome. She lay there for a moment disoriented, and then remembered the kitchen, the tea, the coat around her shoulders. The coat was folded on the chair by the door. She had a vague memory of coming upstairs past 2, of being handed a candle, of nothing after that. She dressed, went downstairs. The kitchen was ordinary in the morning light, just a kitchen, table and stove, and the smell of bread Mrs. Crane had already started. She stood in the doorway for a moment and let it be ordinary. "You slept late," Mrs. Crane said, not looking up. "I was up late," Isla said, and went to put the kettle on, and that was the end of that. Voss came down to breakfast looking exactly as he always did, perfectly put together, the easy smile already in position. He talked about the storm the way people talked about weather they'd observed from comfortable windows. Isla watched him over her cup. She thought about what the Duke had said last night. "He's charming. He's always been charming. I know what he does with it and why." She thought about Mrs. Crane saying he's always very kind, Mr. Voss, with that slight press of the lips. She watched him talk. She watched him smile. She watched him be, effortlessly, the most pleasant person in any room he entered. She thought, what is he getting out of this? She didn't have an answer. She filed the question away. She was assigned Voss's room that afternoon. The guest room needed its weekly going over. Voss was out walking the grounds with the Duke. It was the obvious time. It was a tidy room, which she'd expected.
A man who managed his presentation as carefully as Voss would manage his spaces the same way. Everything in its place. The traveling case closed and latched. A writing case on the desk, closed. She dusted, changed the water in the washing jug, got down on her knees to do the floor under the furniture, which is where the dust always hid. The desk had 3 drawers. She was going to leave them closed, not her business, when the middle one shifted, just slid slightly, the way drawers did in old houses when the wood had swelled through enough seasons. Slid open a half-inch, enough to show papers inside. She should have pushed it closed. She looked at the door, closed, the house quiet around her. She pulled the drawer open. Papers. A stack held together with a piece of ribbon, tied and untied enough times to have gone soft. She lifted them out and looked at the top one. These are old, was her first thought. The paper heavier, slightly yellowed. The ink faded, the particular quality of something kept rather than displayed. She looked at the date, 11 years ago. She read the first letter, read it again. Her hands had started to tremble. It took her 5 minutes to go through all of it. A letter from a woman she didn't recognize, paid clearly, the language transactional under the performance of emotion. Instructions for what to say and where to say it. What details to include to make the story about the money believable. The money itself in Voss's hand, with a date beside it. A second document, a draft, crossed out in places, rewritten. The careful construction of a story, the story, the scandal, the investments, the woman, all of it assembled here, worked out like a problem, refined until it was clean enough to be believed. A third, a copy of a letter to Eleanor. Brief, devastating in its efficiency. The things being said are true. I've seen evidence. You should go. Signed with the name she didn't know, but at the bottom, in different ink, added later, E. Delivered. Confirmed departure Thursday. Voss's handwriting. Ela sat down on the edge of the bed because her legs had made that decision independently of the rest of her. She held the papers and looked at them. 11 years. He had done this 11 years ago and kept the evidence. Not destroyed it, kept it. In a drawer in the guest room of the house of the man he had destroyed, the man who trusted him completely, who had said he's been the one consistent thing, in a voice that had no idea. Why would he keep them? The thought arrived cold and clear. Why would you keep evidence of what you did in this house? Unless... Have you been reading long? She didn't scream. She startled badly, the papers shifting in her hands, but she didn't scream. Voss was in the doorway.
He was still smiling. That was the thing. The same expression he always had, warm and easy. And it was completely wrong. And the wrongness of it was worse than if he'd looked angry. Because this was a man who had done what was in these papers and had kept them and had come back to this house every few months for 11 years and had smiled exactly like that the entire time. I was cleaning, she said. Her voice came out steady. She was obscurely grateful for this. The drawer was open, he said pleasantly. It slid. Ah. He came into the room, easy, unhurried, the walk of a man who had decided he was in no danger. He stopped at the desk, held out his hand. I'll take those. She looked at his hand, at the papers in her own. What are these? She said. Old correspondence, nothing interesting. They're not old correspondence, she said. This is a record of what you did, to him, to Adrian. She heard herself use his name and didn't stop. You planned it. You paid someone. You wrote to Eleanor. You've had quite a read, Voss said. Why did you keep them? She looked up at him. Why would you keep these in this house? Something moved across his face. The first real thing. Briefly. Gone quickly. Insurance, he said. Simply. Like the word was nothing. Against what? Against various things. People change their minds. Situations change. It's useful to have records of arrangements. He held out his hand again, patient, still pleasant. Now, I'll take those. She stood up. She was frightened. She noted this with some detachment. Her heart was doing something emphatic in her chest. Her hands were trembling, and Voss was between her and the door. She held the papers. "You've been coming here for 11 years, she said, managing his affairs, telling him you're his friend, and all this time he's had someone to rely on," Voss said, still pleasant. "He wouldn't have managed without me. The estate, the legal matters, he was barely functional after Eleanor left. I kept things running." He tilted his head. "I've been good for him." "You destroyed him," she said. "I simplified things," Voss said, and the pleasantness flickered, just for a moment, into something colder, something that had been sitting underneath the surface of him this entire time, patient and certain. He was going to ruin himself on his own. I made a decision, several decisions, and Adrian has had a quiet, well-managed life as a result. He's been alone for 11 years. He's been safe, Voss said, in a house that's his, with someone who ensures nothing goes wrong. He looked at her steadily, without people making complicated things of a situation that was already complicated enough. "That's what I am," she said, complicated. Something moved across his face, assessed. "You're an unexpected variable." The pleasantness back, fully, like a light switched on. "And I think you're a sensible woman. I think you understand that what you're holding is very old and means very little, and that even if it meant something, a housekeeper's assistant is not the sort of person who—" "Don't," she said. He stopped. "Don't finish that sentence." He looked at her for a moment, recalibrated. The smile came back, slightly different, sharper at the edges. "Give me the papers," he said. "No," she said. The words sat between them. He looked at it, looked at her, and something happened in his face. Not anger, not panic, nothing as uncontrolled as that. Just a decision being made. Quickly, cleanly, the way a man made decisions when he'd been making certain kinds of decisions for a very long time. He reached out, not for the papers, for her wrist. His hand closed around it, light, the grip of someone making a point rather than causing pain. "You're going to give me those," he said quietly, the pleasantness entirely gone. "And you're going to go back to your cleaning. And tomorrow I'm going to recommend to Adrian that your position be reconsidered, because you've caused quite enough disruption to a household that was running perfectly well before you arrived." He held her wrist, not hurting, just holding. "And that will be the end of it." Isla looked at his hand on her wrist. She thought about a man in a kitchen at 1 a.m. saying, "I don't know how to do this," with the walls completely down. A coat around her shoulders, and hands that had stayed when they didn't have to. 11 years of careful, managed isolation, and a lawyer who visited every few months, and smiled, and called it friendship. She looked back at Voss. "You don't know me," she said, "at all." His grip tightened slightly. "Ms. Marrow, let go of my wrist," she said. A beat. He let go. She stepped back. 2 steps. She still had the papers. She looked at him across the room, this handsome, pleasant, dangerous man who had kept his evidence in a drawer like a trophy and come back to this house for 11 years and called it care. "I'm going to need you to leave this room," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he smiled. The real one, she thought, the one that had been sitting underneath all the others, and it was not warm at all. "Of course," he said. He stepped back from the doorway. She walked through it. She walked down the corridor with the papers against her chest and her heart very loud in her ears, and her hands, now that she was out of the room, shaking properly, the way they'd wanted to since the drawer had slid open. She found the alcove at the bottom of the east staircase and stood there for a full minute. She breathed. Then she straightened up. She went to find the Duke. She didn't find the Duke. She found Voss instead. He was waiting at the bottom of the main staircase, not hiding,
just standing there in the entrance hall, in plain sight, hands clasped behind his back, the pleasant face back in position. She stopped. He looked at the papers in her hands. "I thought we should finish our conversation, properly." "I was going to find His Grace," she said. "I know. That's why I thought we should talk first." He gestured toward the sitting room off the entrance hall, the formal one. Nobody used it, nobody would pass. She didn't move. "Miss Manor, I'm not going to hurt you. I'd like to talk, that's all." She went in. He followed, closed the door, didn't lock it. She noted the specific choice, the message it was meant to send. "This is a conversation. You're free to leave. I'm being reasonable." He sat. She didn't. "Let me explain something," he said, in the tone of a man explaining something to someone who had failed to grasp the obvious. "What you're holding is 11 years old. The woman in those letters has been in Edinburgh for a decade. The financial arrangements are long closed. Even if you showed those papers to someone, there is nothing that can be verified today." He spread his hands. "Nothing that can be proven." Ilse said nothing. "And consider the position you're in. You're a housekeeper's assistant, 3 weeks here. You came from nothing, with a sick mother and empty purse." He said it without cruelty, just facts, just the shape of things. "And you're going to go to the Duke of Rathmore with a story about his oldest friend, his lawyer, the man who has managed his estate for 11 years. He looked at her steadily. "And he's going to believe you?" "Yes," she said. Something flickered in Voss's eyes, quick, suppressed. "You're very confident. I'm accurate," she said. He stood, crossed to the fireplace, a fire going, small but real, and held out his hand. "Give me the papers." "No." "Miss Manor, no." He looked at her. Then he crossed to her, 3 steps, quick, the pleasantness entirely gone, and took the papers from her hand. Not violently. He was bigger than her, and he simply took them, the way you took something from a child, decisively, completely. She moved forward. "Don't—" He put them in the fire. Not all at once, carefully, sheet by sheet, with the patience of a man executing a plan without rush. She watched each page catch, curl, darken, go. The letter to Eleanor, the draft of the story, the payment record, the woman's letter, the instructions, gone. He set the last page on the grate and turned around, the pleasant face fully back, completely settled. "Now," he said, "you have nothing." Isla looked at the fire. She thought about sitting on the edge of the guest room bed with her hands shaking, about Eleanor receiving a letter and leaving within a fortnight, about a man in a music room who had kept the piano polished for a decade because it was the only thing he had left that was his. She looked at the fire until the last edge of paper was gone. Then she looked at Voss. "You have no evidence," he said. "You have a story, and stories told by young women with no position and no standing against men with 11 years of established trust are—" He paused, letting her fill in the rest. "Dismissed," she said. "Dismissed," he agreed, kindly. "It's not personal. It's simply how things are." "So here's what I suggest," he said. "You go back to your work. We say nothing more about this. I'll even recommend he increase your salary. I think you've done good work here." Isla said nothing. "Or," Voss said, the pleasantness not dropped, just adjusted, showing the thing underneath without fully revealing it, "or you continue with this. You go to Adrian with your story and your empty hands. And I will be sad about it. I'll explain that you've become unstable, that the isolation of Rathmore has done something to your judgment, that you've developed an unhealthy preoccupation." He said it without pleasure, just flatly, which was somehow worse. "He'll believe me. He's believed me for 11 years. You'll be gone, the salary will be gone." He looked at her steadily. "And then I'll think about your mother." The room went very quiet. "What did you say?" Isla said. "Your mother," Voss said. In her flat, with the rattling window, who needs medicine consistently and long-term. He said it conversationally, like he was recalling something she'd told him over tea. These things can become complicated. A woman in that situation, dependent on a regular arrangement, small delays, administrative difficulties. He looked up. It wouldn't be difficult. Isla looked at him. She didn't move, she didn't look at the door. She stood in the middle of a cold, formal sitting room and looked at Dorian Voss, at his clean hands and his pleasant face, and 11 years of careful, patient, cheerful destruction, and felt something move through her. Not fear. Fear had been what she'd felt upstairs with the papers shaking in her hands. This was something else, something colder, something that came from deeper than fear and had more iron in it. She thought about her mother. Not the sick version, not the coughing in the damp flat version, but the earlier one. Her mother at the window of their old house, mending something in the last of the evening light because daylight was free, hands quick and certain, humming something tuneless and pleasant. Her mother who had raised her alone and never complained and had said when Isla had shown her the Rathmore advertisement, "Go, love, it's good money, don't worry about me." Voss was watching her face, looking for the thing he expected to find, the moment of calculation, the weighing of options, the slow arriving at the conclusion he'd already built for her. "You've just threatened my mother," she said. "I've described a possible situation. You threatened my mother," she said again, not louder, clearer, like she was making sure the words were precisely the right words for what had just happened in this room. "You took that from me," she said, "in order to protect yourself from a housekeeper's assistant with no evidence." She looked at him. "Because you're frightened." Something moved across his face, fast, gone. "I'm being practical," he said. "You're frightened because I know. The papers are gone, but I know, and he knows me, and you've known since the first lunch that I am not the kind of person who—" She stopped, took a breath. She took one step toward him. He didn't step back, she'd give him that, but something in his posture shifted, the smallest adjustment, the rebalancing of a man who had expected this to go differently. "You don't know me," she said, quietly, certainly. "You came to this house and saw a girl with an empty purse and a sick mother, and thought you understood exactly what I would do when pushed." She held his gaze. "You've been wrong about me since the first day. You're wrong now." Voss looked at her. The pleasant face was still there, but behind it, the thing she'd been watching for without knowing she was watching, something had shifted. The expression of a man who had built a very good wall and was looking at a crack he didn't put there. "The papers are gone," he said. "Yes," she said. "You have nothing." "I have what I read," she said. "I have a very good memory. And I have—" She stopped. She thought about a kitchen at 1 in the morning, a coat around her shoulders. "I don't know how to do this. I've forgotten the shape of it." She thought about what it would mean to tell him, to say, "I know what I saw, and I know this man well enough to know he will believe me." And about what Voss would do between now and that conversation if she told him she was going to have it. "I have things you can't take. That's all." She walked to the door. "Miss Marrow," his voice, still even, still controlled, but with something under it she hadn't heard from him before. She stopped, hand on the door. "I meant what I said, about your mother." She stood with her back to him. "I know you did," she said. She opened the door and went out. She went to the kitchen, not because she wanted tea. She didn't want anything. She was operating on something that wasn't quite calm, but looked like it from the outside. She went because Mrs. Crane was there, and Mrs. Crane was the safest thing in Rathmore, and she needed somewhere safe for 5 minutes before she did what she was going to do next. Mrs. Crane looked up, looked at her face, said nothing, put the kettle on. Isla sat down, put both hands flat on the table, breathed in, breathed out. "Where is he?" His Grace. East grounds. He usually comes in by 4. Mrs. Crane set a cup down without being asked. It's 3:30. Isla, Mrs. Crane said quietly. I'm all right, Isla said. I didn't ask. I know. She looked at the cup, at her own hands beside it, at the kitchen that had been warm and separate and its own small world last night before the morning had arrived and become this. She wrapped her hands around the cup. I know, she said. She waited for 4 o'clock. He came in at 4:10. She heard the side door, the one that opened from the east grounds, the one he always used, and she stood up from the kitchen table where she'd been sitting for 40 minutes and went to meet him. He was in the corridor, pulling off his riding gloves when he saw her. He stopped, looked at her face. What's happened? He said, not a question. I need to talk to you, somewhere private. His eyes moved just briefly toward the direction of the sitting room, then back to her. The study, he said. He closed the study door and went to the window, not the desk this time, leaned against the sill with his arms crossed, the posture of a man making himself available rather than defensive. She noted it. It helped. Tell me, he said. She told him, clearly, in order, without anything extra. The drawer, the papers, what was in them. She watched his face while she talked and kept her own voice steady. He was very still while she talked, not the controlled stillness he used in company, but a different kind, the stillness of someone giving a thing their complete attention because it required it. When she got to delivered, confirmed departure Thursday in Voss's handwriting, something moved in his face, small, gone quickly. She kept going. She told him about the sitting room, the fire. You have nothing. She did not tell him about her mother. That part later. She'd decided this in the kitchen, one thing at a time. She finished. The study was quiet. He was looking at the middle distance, at the place people looked when they were trying to fit something very large into a very small space, and finding it didn't. Dorian, he said, just the name, like he was testing whether it still meant what it had meant this morning. Yes, she said. You're telling me that Dorian? Yes. He was quiet. The papers are gone. Yes. So you have... What I read, she said, and what I'm telling you now. He looked at her then, fully, the dark gray eyes doing what they did, reading, assessing, and she let him. She stood in the middle of his study and let him look at her, and didn't fill the silence. Why would he started. The estate, your position. If you'd married Eleanor, if everything had continued as it was, things would have changed. His role, his access. She paused. I don't know exactly what he wanted. I know what he did. I've known him since I was 8 years old, he said. I know. He came after Eleanor left. He managed everything when I couldn't. He sat with me. His jaw moved. He sat with me and told me it wasn't my fault. Isla said nothing. He told me Eleanor had made her choice and that some people weren't built for difficulty, and I was better off knowing it now than later. He looked at the window. He told me that every time I wanted to contact her, he told me it would only cause more pain, to let it go. A pause. I let it go. The fire ticked. Outside, the late afternoon light was going gold. She had to say it now. The night the story started, she said. The night it began going around. Where were you? Here. At Rathmore. I'd come up for the autumn. And Voss. A pause. He was... The Duke stopped.
He was very still. He came up that same week, he said slowly. He'd said he had estate business. He arrived on the Monday. He stopped again. Eleanor left on the Thursday. Isla waited.
He said he'd tried to talk to her, that he'd gone to see her and she wouldn't, that she'd already made up her mind by the time he arrived. A pause. He was very sorry about it. He was looking at the window. She could see his face in the glass, dim and golden in the late light. He arrived Monday, he said. The letters, she said gently. E delivered. She watched him understand it. Not all at once. It arrived the way a tide arrived, the way cold arrived in old stone houses, slowly, then completely. She watched it move through him, watched his face move through it, and it was the most painful thing she had seen in her life. First, the pieces still separate. Then, the moment they stopped being separate. Eleanor made her choice, became Eleanor was told to go. I trusted the wrong person, became I was standing next to the person destroying me, and I called him my friend. His face didn't collapse. He wasn't built for collapsing. But it changed, all the way down. The hard lines the same, but everything behind them different, like a house that looked the same from the outside, but had been entirely rearranged inside. 10 years. He had spent 10 years in this house, alone, the music room, the polished piano, the grounds going wild, because of a Monday in November when his oldest friend had arrived with estate business and a very good face. She watched him carry it, and she couldn't. She turned around. There was no decision. She just turned away from him, toward the bookshelves, toward anything that wasn't his face doing what it was doing, because she was crying. Not loudly, not with any noise at all, just silently, the tears coming without her permission, the way they did when something was too big and too true and too sad, and the body responded before the mind could stop it. She pressed her lips together, looked at the books, third shelf from the top, the spines going blurry. She was not going to do this in front of him. She was here to help him, to tell him the truth. She was not here to fall apart in his study and make him manage her feelings on top of everything else. She breathed. She heard him move. Not toward the desk, not toward the door, toward her. She didn't turn around, very busy looking at the third shelf, getting herself back under control, which she was going to manage in approximately 30 more seconds if given the opportunity. Isla. Her name. Just that. She pressed her eyes closed. His hands came to her shoulders, both of them, turning her, gently, completely. She let him turn her. She was still crying, and she looked at him, and his face was not composed. He'd stopped composing it. Every wall gone. What was there wasn't the Duke, wasn't the armor, wasn't 10 years of managed isolation. Just a man, looking at her like she was the only solid thing in the room. He pulled her in. Not dramatically, just in. His arms around her, her face against his chest, his chin coming down against her hair. Holding her the way you held someone when you didn't have words and knew it, and had decided that was all right. She stopped trying to be quiet. Just for a moment, just a very small number of moments, in the study, in the late afternoon light, with the fire going, and 11 years of wrongness finally named and sitting in the room. She cried. He held her. His hand moved once, slowly, up her back, just there. Then she breathed in and straightened. He let her. His hands fell back, but he didn't step away entirely, stayed close, watching her face. His eyes were very bright. He wasn't crying. She didn't think he remembered how. But there was something in his face close to it.
10 years of a particular grief finally given its correct name. Dorian, he said quietly. Just the name, now that it meant something entirely different. Yes, she said. You found this in his room, and then you sat in the kitchen and waited for me to come in. Yes. 43, she said. Something moved across his face, the almost laugh. Even now, even here. You didn't come find me in the grounds. Because you needed to come in on your own, and I needed to have 43 minutes. He looked at her face, still damp. Are you all right? He said. Yes. Then, no. Then, I will be. He nodded, like that was the correct answer, because he'd been giving versions of it for 11 years. There's something else, she said. He threatened my mother, if I told you. The stillness that came over him was different from all the others, something very deep and very cold and entirely controlled. Did he? He said. Yes. Tell me exactly what he said. She told him. His face didn't change. It had gone to the place it went when a decision was already made. Your mother will be fine, he said. You can't. Your mother will be fine. I will make sure of it personally, today. He looked at her steadily. Do you believe me? She looked at him. This man who had not left Rathmore in 10 years, standing with 11 years of betrayal rearranging itself inside him, saying, your mother will be fine, like it was a thing he could simply decide. Yes, she said. Good. He straightened, the Duke coming back alongside the man. Stay here. Where are you going? To find Dorian, he said. He went to the door, stopped. Turn back. Isla, he said. Yes? Thank you, he said. No fuss, no performance, just the clean directness and the absolute meaning of it. She nodded. He went out. She stood in the study alone in the late light. She looked at the bookshelves, third shelf from the top, the spines in focus now, perfectly readable. Outside, she heard his footsteps, slow, unhurried, deliberate. The footsteps of a man who had remembered how to move in his own house. She sat down in the chair by the window and waited. She heard raised voices for the first time in Rathmore. Not shouting, the Duke didn't shout, but voices with an edge that carried through the walls. Voss's first, smooth, then less smooth, then a thinness like a wire pulled too tight. Then the Duke, quiet, which was worse. Then a door. Then nothing. Mrs. Crane appeared 20 minutes later with the expression of a woman keeping her opinions in strict internal order. He's asked Mr. Voss to leave tonight. She folded her hands. Mr. Voss came through the kitchen on his way upstairs. He didn't look at me. He always looks at me, always acknowledges the staff. She looked at the table. He didn't look at me. Good, said Mrs. Crane, which was the most she ever said. Voss left at 6:30. Isla watched from the upper landing. He came through the entrance hall with his traveling case, presentation immaculate even now. He didn't look up. The Duke stood in the entrance hall and watched him go. No handshake, no words, just standing very still, watching the man who had been his oldest friend walk to the door and through it. The door closed. The Duke stood there for a moment, then looked up at the landing. He didn't say anything, neither did she, but she held his gaze from the top of the stairs, and he held hers from the bottom, and something passed between them that had gone past words. Then he turned and went back to his study. She went back to her room. He came to breakfast the next morning and sat at the table while she was still there. Mrs. Crane found an urgent reason to be elsewhere. He put a letter on the table. I wrote to a solicitor in London, not Voss, someone with no connection to any of this. I've asked him to look into the original documentation. The financial records from 11 years ago, the correspondence that went to Eleanor's family. He looked at his coffee. Voss didn't know what I'd kept. You kept things? I kept everything from that time. Boxes in the east attic. 11 years, and I couldn't destroy it. A pause. She thought about a piano kept polished in a locked room. It might be enough, he said, combined with your account. Eleanor should know what actually happened. And then, she said, and then we see. It took 3 weeks. The solicitor came, a second man who dealt with old records, letters to London, and one very carefully written to Edinburgh, where Eleanor had been living quietly for 10 years. Isla watched it happen the way you watched a house being rebuilt, slowly, with setbacks, and days where nothing seemed to move. She kept working. She kept leaving coffee outside his door in the mornings, started it the week after the study, without announcement. It was just there when he went to ride. He never mentioned it. He started riding again, early. The east wood path was overgrown but passable. She noticed things changing, incremental, quiet. A window opened in the west wing for the first time in years. The groundsman getting new instructions. A village letter replied to about drainage ignored for 5 years. Small things, the kind that didn't announce themselves. She noticed all of them. The letter from Eleanor came on a Thursday. She didn't read it, it wasn't hers to read, but she saw his face when he came out of the study that afternoon. Not forgiveness exactly, not the right word for what could travel between two people across 10 years and a great deal of damage, but something. She set a cup of tea outside the study door and went back to her work. The decision about London came on a morning in November. Exactly 11 years, he pointed out. She said she hadn't been counting. He said she was lying. She didn't deny it. They were in the library, her chair, his chair, the fire, the rain, when he said it. I'm going to London. The solicitor needs me there, to sign things, to speak to people in person. He looked at the fire. I've been avoiding it for 11 years. You don't have to, she said. You're free of it now. You don't owe anyone a return. I know. I'm going anyway. The specific pause she'd learned to read. What came next had been prepared. With you. I'm your housekeeper's assistant, she said. You are. You're also the person who found the truth in a desk drawer and held it while someone burned it and didn't flinch. He held her gaze. And you're the person I would like beside me when I walk back into a city that decided it knew who I was. If you'll come. She looked at him for a long moment, at this man who had been broken and had stayed broken and had, slowly, quietly, started to put both himself and the house back together. I need to check on my mother, she said. I know. We'll go through your village first. We. She noticed it. All right, she said. The morning they left, Mrs. Crane was in the entrance hall with her coat already on. She'd been waiting. She'd known. You'll write, Isla said. Mrs. Crane looked at her, the sharp eyes reading everything without asking about any of it. Then she put both arms around Isla and held on for a moment, the most demonstrative thing Isla had ever seen her do. Good girl, she said quietly. Let go. Became Mrs. Crane again immediately. The Duke came downstairs. Something passed between them, 30 years of it. The Eastwood path. The groundsman's cleared it properly. Good, thank you. Be careful in London. People there have long memories. So do I, he said. The carriage was at the front. The gates open, both of them, all the way, the full width unused for a decade. Isla stood at the top of the steps. She felt him come up beside her. Ready? She said. No, he said. He reached out, not the steadying grip, not any of the cautious contacts of the past weeks, just his hand, open, beside hers. She put her hand in it. His fingers closed. But you're here, he said. I'm here, she said. They went down the steps together. Epilogue. They stayed in London for 6 weeks. It was not easy, not with a decade of stories to be undone and a name to be rebuilt. But things happened. The documentation from the East Attic was, as the solicitor put it, considerably more useful than anticipated. Combined with Isla's account, given formally, clearly, in a meeting she walked into and did not allow to intimidate her, and Eleanor's letter, written with the precision of a woman who had spent 10 years being wrong about something and wanted the record to reflect it, the shape of things changed. Not everything, not overnight. Some doors stayed closed, but others opened. Voss was a different matter. What could be proven was proven. Isla chose not to follow every step of what came after. She knew the shape of it. That was enough. They went to her village on the way back. Her mother was sitting up in bed, better than last time. She looked at Isla, then at the man who had come in behind her, and said, with the directness of a woman who had raised Isla and knew exactly where she'd gotten it from, "So you're the difficult one." "Yes," he said. Her mother looked at him for a long moment, then at Isla. "Sit down, both of you. I'll have someone bring tea." It was, Isla thought, the most important meeting she'd ever been in. They came back to Rathmore in December. Frost on the grounds, the house warm, Mrs. Crane at the door before the carriage had stopped. The west wing windows had been cleaned while they were away, all of them catching the thin winter light. She stood in the entrance hall and looked at it, at the portraits, the chandelier, the floor she'd cleaned on her 3rd day, the staircase she'd come down the first time she'd heard music through the walls. He came to stand beside her. "It looks different," she said. "It looks the same," he said. "No," she said, "it doesn't." He looked at the hall, at the light, at the house that had been closed so long and was not closed anymore. "No," he said, "I suppose it doesn't." She took off her coat, hung it on her hook, the one that had been hers since the 2nd week, and went to find Mrs. Crane to tell her they were home. Behind her, she heard the front door, still open. She didn't go back to close it.
Thank you for staying with the story until the very end. Let us know which city you're watching from and how the story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future stories.